It began like so many stories we wish didn't have to be told. On a quiet night, in a city park, under the indifferent glow of streetlights, Officer Darren Cole, a man worn down by disappointment and fueled by a bitterness he refused to name, spotted someone he believed didn't belong. Her name was Jade Matthews, a black woman walking alone, gym bag slung over her shoulder, fresh from teaching a community self-defense class. But to Cole, her confidence, her presence, her mere existence in that space, at that time, was enough to trigger suspicion. What followed was not a lawful stop or a routine check-in. It was an abuse of power cloaked in the language of authority. The tension in the air was electric as Cole barked orders with escalating hostility, misreading Jade's composed posture as defiance. He demanded answers to questions she had no obligation to answer, twisted her calm into a threat, and gripped his baton like it was the last tether to his shrinking authority. And yet, Jade didn't break. Her voice never wavered. Her body remained still, controlled, disciplined. She wasn't just trained in martial arts. She was trained in dignity, in survival, in how to stand tall in the face of injustice without letting it consume her. When Officer Cole finally snapped, lunging with baton in hand, expecting to frighten or subdue her, he miscalculated everything. Jade moved like water. With swift, precise motion, she deflected the blow, redirected his force, and brought him down not with violence, but with control. It was not a fight. It was a reckoning. Cole, stunned and furious, found himself sprawled on the concrete, not because she wanted to harm him, but because she refused to let him harm her. This wasn't the story of a criminal resisting arrest. It was the story of a woman protecting her peace, her body, and her rights. And yes, someone filmed it. And yes, the world will talk about it. But behind the viral moment is a deeper truth. Jade Matthews is not a moment. She is a movement. She reminds us that strength isn't always loud, that justice sometimes begins when one person simply says, "No more." And if this story moved you, if Jade's courage resonated with something deep in your chest, then stay with us. Because we tell stories that matter. Stories that shine light where others want to cast shadows. Stories that remind you that silence is not safety, and dignity is worth defending. Subscribe to our channel to hear more powerful, real-life stories that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience. Share this video, drop a comment below. Let us know how this story made you feel. Because change starts with conversation, and conversation starts right here. From the moment Jade Matthews stepped into a room, there was a shift, a quiet power, like the hush before a storm. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. She commanded it. At just 6 years old, her teachers called her an old soul. There was something ancient in her eyes, something carved by time and tempered by fire. She wasn't precocious in the way that children often are. She was still observant. Like she had already lived 100 lives and learned not to waste energy on things that wouldn't matter in the long run. But what the world saw as poise, it also misread as permission. To overlook her, to underestimate her, to test how far she would bend before she broke. What they didn't know was, Jade didn't break. She learned how to bend like bamboo, flexible in the storm, rooted in something deeper. Her childhood wasn't easy, but she didn't wear her pain on the outside. Her father was a long-haul trucker, gone for weeks at a time. Her mother worked double shifts in a hospital ER. Responsibility found Jade early. She cooked, she studied, she waited up. She took care of things. But it wasn't until she discovered martial arts that she found her center. A local dojo opened a few blocks from her neighborhood. a narrow space between a pawn shop and a corner store. She wandered in one evening, 11 years old, still in her school uniform, and something just clicked. The movements, the discipline, the code of honor. It gave her something that no one else had offered her, a sense of control in a world that constantly tried to take it away. She trained relentlessly, not for trophies, not for belts, but for peace. She learned to fight, not because she wanted to, but because she knew someday she might have to. Every kata, every strike, every quiet breath on the mat taught her how to hold her ground. And that lesson, holding her ground, followed her everywhere. Through school, through relationships, through jobs where her brilliance was muted by louder, less qualified voices. Through moments when she was told to calm down, when she hadn't even raised her voice. Through encounters where her skin, her gender, her silence was read as either a threat or a challenge. Through every time she was watched too closely or not seen at all. By 32, Jade had become two things: a respected sculptor and a revered self-defense instructor. Her art was visceral, raw, steel twisted into gentle arcs, stone carved into bold silhouettes. Her gallery shows were small but powerful. People described her work the same way they described her: quiet, but impossible to ignore. And in her studio/dojo, nestled inside a weather-worn brick community center, she taught women, young and old, how to find their strength, how to trust their instincts, how to fight back if they had to. She taught survivors how to reclaim space, taught high schoolers how to walk home without flinching, taught mothers how to breathe through fear. Not because violence was inevitable, but because power could be shared, not feared. It was after one of those classes that the night unfolded. But we're not there yet. We're still in the moment before, the breath before the drop. The class had ended, and Jade stood barefoot on the mat, the faint scent of sweat and eucalyptus in the air. Her students, some shy, some fierce, had thanked her with hugs and laughter, some with nothing but a nod and a glimmer of something freer in their eyes. That night, she had taught them a new technique for breaking holds from behind. She emphasized not the speed of the reaction, but the clarity of the mind. "Your body already knows what to do," she told them. "You just have to believe it's allowed to do it." The moment the last student left, Jade exhaled, a long, quiet breath that carried the weight of the day. She wiped down the mats, packed her bag, gloves, towel, water bottle, wooden practice knives, and stepped outside into the sharp air of early fall. The city hummed its low, constant song. Streetlights blinked. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. It was just another night. Ordinary in every way. But Jade knew the truth about nights like this. How fast they could turn. How easily peace could become chaos. She walked home the long way, through Pinewood Park, a stretch of green that cut between neighborhoods like a vein. Most people avoided it after dark, but Jade never had. She trusted her steps, trusted her senses. Still, as she moved deeper into the park's tree-shadowed paths, she felt it. That old instinct. The one that whispered, "Watch your back." A subtle shift in the air. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, but expectant. She slowed, listening. Her eyes scanned the shadows. Nothing. She adjusted her gym bag and kept walking. But she wasn't alone. Watching her from across the field, behind the black outline of a crooked elm, was Officer Darren Cole. Angry. Tired. Not just from the job, but from life. He had once believed he'd be a hero, that the badge would earn him respect. But the world hadn't played along. He was passed over for promotions, mocked behind closed doors, haunted by the sense that the world owed him more than he got. And now, when he saw people who carried themselves with confidence, especially people who didn't look like him, something twisted in his gut. He saw Jade, and his story began writing itself. Suspicious. Alone. Out of place. Dangerous. He didn't see a teacher. He didn't see an artist. He saw someone to confront. But we'll get to that part, to the orders barked, to the questions she didn't owe answers to the moment when the baton was drawn, to the moment when it all changed. Right now, we are still in the stillness, in the heartbeat of who Jade Matthews is. A woman forged by fire, shaped by silence, strengthened by every time the world told her no, and she simply kept going. She is not a vigilante. She is not a threat. But when the threat comes to her, she will not cower. She has too much to protect. Not just herself, but everything she's built, everything she teaches. And so when that moment comes, and it will come, you'll see what happens when strength meets abuse, when dignity meets unchecked power, when someone like Officer Cole steps into a confrontation expecting submission and meets something far more dangerous, a woman who refuses to be broken. We'll take you there, to the confrontation, to the moment it all goes viral, to the arrest and the fallout and the system scrambling to cover its cracks. But before we do, we want you to feel who Jade is. We want you to understand that what happened in that park was not an isolated incident. It was the result of everything that came before it. And it's a story that isn't just hers. It's a story that echoes through generations, through neighborhoods, through headlines that disappear too quickly. So if you're still here, thank you. These stories aren't easy to tell, but they matter. And they deserve to be heard in full, with all the nuance and emotion and truth they carry. If you felt something while listening, if Jade Matthews reminds you of someone you know, or someone you are, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story, because we're just getting started. The real battle is still ahead, and Jade's not the only one fighting it. Jade Matthews walked with the kind of poise that made people turn and look, sometimes out of admiration, sometimes confusion, sometimes suspicion. That night, as she left Pinewood Community Center after leading another successful self-defense class, the air clung to her skin with a chill that didn't come from the cold. There was a heaviness in her chest that she couldn't quite name, an ache she had carried for years and rarely let anyone see. Her students had left empowered, smiling, walking taller than when they arrived. That meant everything to her. She had stayed behind to mop the floors herself, even though volunteers had offered. She always did. It was her way of showing care, making the space safe, clean, welcoming. She believed in rituals like that, little acts of service that reminded her why she did the work, to protect, to uplift, to give back. But by the time she stepped outside, her gym bag over her shoulder, the streets had gone still. The city lights buzzed faintly overhead as she made her way through the shortcut she always took. Pinewood Park, a winding stretch of trees and pathways most people avoided after dark. But Jade wasn't most people. She had walked these paths for years. She knew the turns, the way the streetlights hit the ground like spotlight fragments. She moved with confidence, but she also moved with awareness. That night, her senses were louder than usual. She had felt it the moment she stepped past the first row of trees, the weight of someone watching her. It wasn't loud. It wasn't overt. It was just there, like a hum beneath the skin. Her mother used to call it the whisper, That ancient instinct that told you when danger wasn't loud or visible, but present all the same. She'd learned to listen to it, to respect it. Jade paused for a second, scanning her surroundings. No footsteps, no one behind her, just the rustling of leaves and the rhythm of her own breath. Still, she adjusted her grip on her bag, her fingers brushing against the wooden practice knives inside. Tools, not weapons, harmless unless misinterpreted. She kept walking, but her body was on alert now, every muscle slightly tighter, every sound sharper. What she didn't know was that Officer Darren Cole had already been trailing her from the moment she left the center. Sitting alone in his cruiser at the edge of the park, bored, restless, and itching for something to validate his authority, he saw Jade and immediately felt that simmering discomfort rise in him. It wasn't that she had done anything wrong. It was that she walked like she belonged, that she didn't look afraid, and that was enough to light a fuse. Cole had been on the force for years, long enough to be disillusioned, but not self-aware enough to see how deeply his own biases shaped his actions. When he saw a black woman walking alone through the park at night, dressed in athletic wear, carrying a bag, his mind filled in all the blanks his prejudice needed. Suspicious, out of place, defiant, and beneath it all, something more personal. She reminded him of every person who'd ever looked at him like they didn't fear him, and that made him furious. He stepped out of his cruiser with a practiced swagger and followed her quietly for a few blocks before calling out. "Hey, stop right there!" Jade froze. The tone, the sharpness of it, sent alarms ringing in her mind. She turned slowly, calmly, and faced him. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice even. Her eyes met his with guarded clarity. She wasn't being defensive, just present, aware. That alone seemed to rattle him. He stepped closer, hand on his belt, scanning her like she was a threat. "It's late," he snapped. "What are you doing out here?" "I'm walking home," Jade replied. "I just finished teaching a class at the community center." Cole's eyes narrowed. Her calmness made him feel smaller, less in control. He hated it. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. Jade instinctively tightened her grip on the strap. "Workout gear," she said. "Towel, gloves, practice tools." "Let me see it." His voice was clipped, forceful. Jade hesitated, then slowly set the bag down and unzipped it. Cole reached in, pulled out a wooden training knife, and held it up like a smoking gun. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "Some kind of weapon?" "It's a training tool," she replied. "I teach self-defense." He scoffed, dismissing her with a sneer. "Yeah, sure. You think you're some kind of street fighter?" At that moment, a memory flashed through Jade's mind. Years ago, she had tried to file a report after being harassed outside her apartment building. The officer on duty at the time laughed, said maybe if she didn't carry herself like she was better than everyone, she wouldn't attract the wrong kind of attention. That same tone was in Cole's voice now. That same dismissiveness, that same simmering contempt. She felt her heart beat faster, but she stood her ground. "I've answered your questions," she said. "I haven't done anything wrong." "You don't get to decide that," he snarled. "I do." The tension rose like a wave between them. Jade stood still, but her posture shifted. Grounded. Balanced. Her training activated like muscle memory. She didn't want to fight, but she knew what this was. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a man looking for a reason. "You've got a lot of nerve," Cole said, stepping closer, hand on his baton. "Talking back like that." Jade didn't flinch. "I'm not talking back. I'm asserting my rights." The words hit him like a slap. His face darkened, and suddenly the distance between them closed. "Turn around. Hands on your head," he barked. "For what?" Jade asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. What exactly are you accusing me of? Suspicious behavior, potential weapons, refusing to comply. The list was ridiculous, manufactured, but his tone said he believed it. And still, Jade stayed calm, stayed rooted. But inside her mind raced. She thought of her students, of her mother, of the headlines, of names turned hashtags. She had done everything right, and yet here she was, alone in a park, staring down a man with power and rage and no interest in truth. "I'm not a threat," she said, quieter now. "I'm walking home." "Last chance," he growled, drawing the baton. Jade's breath caught. She didn't want this, but she wouldn't be bullied either. She had worked too hard, survived too much, stood for too many to cower now. He lunged, and everything changed. This is where sympathy turns to solidarity. Jade Matthews is not just a name in a script. She's someone many know in spirit, someone who's been watched too closely, someone who's been asked to explain herself too many times, someone whose calm is mistaken for arrogance, whose pride is mistaken for a threat. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to stay calm in the face of injustice, if you've ever been silenced, dismissed, or endangered just for existing, if you're tired of stories like this happening, but grateful when someone stands their ground, then this is your story too. And it's not over. Stick with us. Subscribe to this channel for the next chapter. Because Jade's story is just beginning, and her courage may be the spark that changes everything. The path was narrow now, and the streetlights were thinning, casting long, fragmented shadows through the trees. But Jade Matthews didn't falter. Her pace was steady, her shoulders squared, her breath controlled, not out of arrogance, but necessity. She knew what this was, not just a routine encounter, not even a misunderstanding. This was a test, a battle of wills disguised as a police stop. Officer Darren Cole was no longer hiding it. His questions had sharpened into demands, his posture shifting from suspicion to aggression, like a predator trying to corner its prey. But Jade had learned long ago how to read body language. She knew the signs. The way his hand hovered just a little too long near his baton. The way his voice clipped with forced control. The tension in his jaw, the twitch in his fingers. She wasn't just dealing with a man in uniform. She was facing someone who needed to prove something, and who had decided she was the battlefield. And in that moment, her heartbeat wasn't the sound of fear. It was the rhythm of preparation. "I'm not giving you attitude," Jade said, her voice steady but edged with steel. "I'm asserting my rights. There's a difference." The words landed like thunder between them. Cole's face darkened. His authority was slipping, and he felt it. Every word from her mouth a crack in the image he had tried to maintain. People usually backed down when he raised his voice. They got nervous. They gave in. But not her. She stood there like a mountain, calm, grounded, watching him with eyes that didn't flinch. It wasn't just defiance, it was clarity. That infuriated him. "You think you're clever, huh?" he snarled, stepping in close, his shadow eclipsing hers. "Walking around like you own the place, carrying this junk." He gestured toward her gym bag, his voice curling into a sneer. "And talking to me like I'm the one in the wrong." Jade didn't move. She didn't need to. Her stillness was louder than any scream. She had been here before. Different face, different setting, but the same dynamic. Someone trying to make her small. Someone trying to make her less. But that didn't work on her anymore. She had earned every inch of ground she stood on. "I never said I was above the law," she replied, her voice like cold water. "But I know it well enough to recognize when it's being misused." That line, more than anything, pushed Cole to the edge. His authority, already cracked, was now crumbling. His power, once unquestioned, was being challenged not with violence, but with composure. And that terrified him, because the truth was, he didn't know what to do with someone like her. Someone who didn't yell, someone who didn't run, someone who stood still and held a mirror to his failure. "You know what?" Cole said abruptly, voice rising. "Enough of this. Turn around. Hands on your head." Jade blinked, not out of fear but disbelief. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he snapped. "Now!" Her fists tightened at her sides, not in readiness to fight, but to anchor herself. She had done nothing wrong. She had shown him her bag, answered every question. She had stayed calm through the rising tide of his fury. But now he was pushing her past the edge of legality, into intimidation, coercion, abuse of power. And all she had done was walk through a park after teaching women how to protect themselves. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" she asked, her voice clipped with restraint. "Carrying potential weapons? Walking while black? Not bowing when spoken to?" Her tone cut through the night like a blade. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was dragging his intentions into the light. She could see it in his eyes. The way they flickered with rage and uncertainty. The way his ego screamed for dominance. And still, she held her ground. "You think you can embarrass me and just walk away?" Cole growled. His voice cracked with emotion now. Not just anger, but humiliation. Jade said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than words. Her presence was an act of resistance. That was when he reached for the baton. The metal scraped free from his belt with a hiss, and Jade's body tensed instinctively. Not to strike, but to survive. "Last chance," he warned, brandishing the baton like a threat, not a tool. "Do as I say or I'll make you." Jade's eyes never left his. Her voice, when it came, was low and clear. "I'm not resisting, but I will not let you intimidate me." That was it. The moment when power lost its mask and revealed its face. The moment when Officer Cole lunged forward, baton raised, expecting fear, expecting surrender, expecting her to fold like so many had before. But Jade didn't fold. She moved with purpose. She sidestepped his charge with the grace of someone who had trained for years for this exact moment, not against cops but against chaos. Her hands didn't lash out. They guided, redirected, disarmed. The baton clattered to the pavement, a hollow sound that echoed across the quiet trees like a gavel dropping. Cole spun, stumbling, his face red with rage, but Jade had already resumed her stance, feet planted, body still, heart hammering with a calm that shook him to his core. For a long breath, they stood there, locked, a silent war. Cole's breathing was ragged, his hands twitched, but he didn't attack again. Not yet. Because in that moment, in front of this woman he couldn't overpower, he felt something new. Fear. Not of her strength, but of his own unraveling. And that's the part no one tells you, that it's not the kicks or the punches or the moves that matter most. It's the refusal to fold. The act of staying calm when the world tries to shake you loose. Jade didn't win because she was stronger. She won because she had trained her mind to stay still. Because she carried a kind of peace that people like Officer Cole couldn't break. A kind of peace that came from surviving everything designed to silence her. She didn't strike back. She didn't retaliate. She simply existed without apology. And in this world, that was the rebellion. So now we turn to you. Yes, you, listening right now. If you're here, it means you felt something. Maybe your chest tightened. Maybe your hands clenched. Maybe you saw yourself in Jade. Or maybe you saw someone you love. A sister. A daughter. A friend. Maybe you recognized how thin the line is between safety and danger, between silence and courage, between dignity and erasure. If Jade's strength moved you, if her composure inspired you, if her refusal to bow reminded you of something deep in your soul, then don't just scroll past, like this video, right now. Not for numbers, not for algorithms, but as a show of solidarity, as a sign that you see her, that you stand with her, that she is not alone in that park, in that moment, under those flickering streetlights. That every time someone like Jade Matthews is cornered and refuses to break, there is a community watching, supporting, saying, "We are with you." Click that like button. Share this story. Drop a comment with the words, "We stand with Jade." Because courage like hers deserves more than silence. It deserves a chorus. And this is just the beginning. The night split open in a flash. The baton came down like a verdict, but Jade Matthews was already moving, not out of rage, but survival. Her body flowed like water around Officer Darren Cole's attack, her training igniting like a current through her limbs. She didn't strike first. She never would. But when he lunged, when he swung at her like she was an animal to be subdued, something inside her snapped into place. Not rage, not fear. Precision. Years of practice. Years of being overlooked, underestimated, misread. Years of silence stored like a second heartbeat. And now it pulsed in every step, every pivot, every movement. She sidestepped the blow and, in one smooth motion, deflected his arm, sending the baton spinning to the pavement with a sharp clatter. The sound was jarring in the night air, like a fire alarm going off in a church. Officer Cole stumbled forward, caught in the momentum of his failed strike. His surprise was written all over his face. Shock that she hadn't run, hadn't flinched, hadn't frozen. She had simply adapted, controlled the chaos he brought with him. He spun to face her again, but Jade was already steady, already grounded, already watching. Her breathing was calm. Her hands were at her sides. She wasn't posturing. She wasn't threatening. She was ready. For a moment, the world stilled. But not him. Cole's face twisted into something primal, humiliation masked as authority, anger disguised as duty. He reached for his taser, his hand shaking with the weight of a situation slipping beyond his control. Jade's eyes flicked to the movement. Her muscles tensed, not to attack, but to protect herself. He leveled the weapon at her, barking out another command, his voice brittle with panic. "Don't move or I'll drop you!" She didn't move. Not because of fear, but because she understood what was really happening. This wasn't about law. This was about ego, about control, about a man who couldn't bear to lose in public, especially to someone who was supposed to be smaller, weaker, more compliant. But Jade had never been any of those things. "There's no need for this," she said, her voice firm but calm. "You're escalating for no reason. I've done nothing wrong." But Cole wasn't listening. Not to her words, not to reason, not to anything but the drumbeat of his own unraveling pride. He fired. The taser cracked in the air, bright and sharp, but Jade moved again. Not to attack, but to defend. The wires missed her, embedding into the grass behind her. In the same moment, she closed the distance. One hand knocked the taser aside. The other redirected his wrist just enough to disarm him without injury. The weapon dropped. Her body moved with intention, with clarity. No wasted motion, no aggression. Just survival, elevated into grace. And still, she didn't retaliate. But Officer Cole wasn't done. He reached to shove her, to assert some kind of power, but Jade shifted again, sidestepping, grounding him, sweeping his legs gently out from under him. He hit the pavement with a thud that echoed through the trees, and still, she didn't run. She didn't gloat. She didn't yell. She just stood there, calm, present, composed, a woman who had every right to rage, and chose resolve instead. But this is the part that matters. She gave him space. She stepped back. She gave him the chance to walk away. She had defended herself, de-escalated the violence he had initiated. But even then, she offered him dignity, the kind he refused to offer her, and that's what shattered him. Because she hadn't just bested him physically, she had unmasked him morally. That's when the joggers appeared, silent observers drawn by the noise. Their faces held confusion, concern, disbelief. And in their eyes, Officer Cole saw what terrified him most. Witnesses. Proof that he had lost control. Proof that his version of events wouldn't go uncontested. And that's when his panic turned to something darker. He barked at them to back up, his voice cracking with desperation. "This is a police matter," he shouted. "Step away!" But no one moved. A man raised his hands. "We're just trying to understand what's going on," he said. But Cole didn't want understanding. He wanted obedience. And Jade? She watched it all. She watched him unravel. She watched how fast control could become cruelty. How quickly someone could lose sight of their oath when pride got in the way of peace. And still, she stood steady. She said nothing more. Not until another voice cut through the air. A deeper voice. Calmer. More composed. "Cole," it said. "What's going on here?" Another officer stepped out of the shadows. Taller, broader, with a calm authority that filled the space. His badge read, "Reed Simmons." His tone was measured, his posture firm. He took one look at the scene, the fallen baton, the disarmed taser, the scattered witnesses, and asked no one in particular. "This is how we're handling things now?" Cole stammered, tried to regain footing. "She resisted. She assaulted me." Simmons raised an eyebrow. "Funny. I see a woman standing calmly and a fellow officer on the ground. Doesn't look like resistance to me." The joggers murmured in agreement. The narrative was slipping from Cole's fingers like sand. And for a moment, just a moment, Jade felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. But she also knew better. This wasn't over. Because men like Cole didn't let go easily, even when every eye in the park saw the truth. Even when his authority had been stripped bare. His pride was a beast, and it wasn't done fighting. He was escorted back toward his car. Simmons de-escalated, spoke to Jade, promised a full report. But as she turned to leave, she heard the car door slam. She heard the radio crackle. She saw Cole shouting again, wild and red-faced. And she knew. He was still trying to win. So she braced herself. Because there's a difference between the end of a fight and the end of a war. And Jade's war, against systems, assumptions, and small men with big egos, was still raging. She didn't choose this battle, but she wasn't afraid of it either. So now, we turn to you. You've heard her story. You've walked these moments with her. You've felt the weight of injustice creeping through the trees, the panic of being cornered for existing, the strength it takes not just to fight, but to stay calm in the face of chaos. Now it's your turn to act. Leave a comment below. Let Jade know she's not alone. Let her know that standing up for yourself, calmly, with dignity, is a kind of courage the world needs more of. Type, "We see you, Jade," or "Strength in stillness," or just drop A if her courage lit something in you. Because women like her shouldn't have to carry these stories alone. Because when one person stands up to power, the rest of us need to stand with them. This isn't just a story, it's a mirror. And the reflection? It's us. Time stood still, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Jade Matthews remained where she was, her feet planted on the pavement, her hands at her sides, her breath steady despite the electricity buzzing in the air around her. She had just disarmed a furious, out-of-control police officer, Officer Darren Cole, and now stood across from him, not as an aggressor, not as a threat, but as a woman who had chosen not to be broken. Her calmness wasn't silence. It was a boundary. And yet, even in this state of undeniable restraint, she felt the atmosphere tighten, like the sky before a storm. Officer Cole lay on the ground where she had swept him moments earlier, groaning more from embarrassment than injury. His baton, now cold metal glinting beneath the nearest streetlight, sat between them like an unspoken truth. She didn't move toward it. She didn't move at all. She didn't have to. Because what came next was no longer in her hands. Footsteps. At first, she thought it was just the wind rustling the gravel behind her. But then the sounds grew more distinct. Shoes pounding soft earth, rhythmic breaths, a faint murmur of voices. Jade's eyes flicked to the side. Out of the shadows emerged a small group of late-night joggers, slowing to a stop as they took in the scene. A woman standing tall, still, commanding. A police officer on the ground, red-faced and furious, and between them, tension so thick it seemed to hold gravity. The joggers hovered on the periphery, unsure, curious, concerned. Some held their phones. Others just stared. None of them spoke right away. It was as if they could sense the fragile edge the moment balanced on. And it changed everything. Because now there were witnesses. The silence cracked, not from a scream or a shout, but from the sheer weight of being seen. And Jade felt it. The invisible shift. The kind that lives not in action, but in perception. Before, it had been just her and Cole, a private confrontation where he could twist the story however he liked. But now he would have to answer to the gaze of strangers, to judgment not filtered through a badge or a report, but through the simple act of being watched. Officer Cole's eyes widened slightly when he noticed the onlookers. His body stiffened as he scrambled to his feet, brushing gravel from his pants with jerky movements. The authoritative mask he wore so easily had cracked beyond repair. His voice, when it returned, was sharp, brittle. "Back up! Step away! This is a police matter!" The joggers didn't move. One man, middle-aged with uncertainty in his eyes, raised his hands in a show of peace. "We're just trying to understand what's happening," he said gently. "Is she okay?" That question, "Is she okay?" landed like a stone in the middle of a pond. Because until now, everything had centered on Cole's authority, Cole's control, Cole's accusations. But now someone was asking about her. The woman, the civilian, the target who refused to flinch. Cole bristled, his chest heaving. "She resisted arrest," he snapped. "She assaulted an officer. She's not innocent." But even as he said it, the words rang hollow. Jade hadn't moved. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't lashed out. And the audience, those silent observers, could see it, could feel it. There was no wildness in her posture, no rage in her breath, only control, only presence. And that terrified him more than any blow could have. Because power, when it's fragile, is threatened not by violence, but by dignity. Jade said nothing. She didn't have to. Her composure was her statement. Her restraint was her resistance. But inside, her heart raced. Not from fear, but from the magnitude of the moment. She had been in situations like this before, where all it would take was one false move, one twisted version of events, one lie too easily believed. She had seen how fast the truth could be buried under assumptions, how often calm black bodies were repainted as dangerous after the fact. She thought of names she carried like scars. Women and men turned hashtags. Lives flattened into footage. And now here she was, at the center of another unfolding story. But this time, she wasn't invisible. This time, someone had seen her. The crowd was still small, but growing. One jogger lifted a phone. Jade saw the light blink red as it began to record. Her stomach clenched, not because she feared being exposed, but because the lens was now part of her defense. The camera had become her witness. And in this world, proof often mattered more than truth. Officer Cole must have sensed it too. His panic started to show. The words came faster, more erratic. "She's not cooperating. She's carrying weapons. You don't know what she's capable of." But even as he spoke, Jade's gym bag lay open a few feet away, its contents plain. Gloves, towel, wooden training knives. Not weapons, tools, evidence of who she was, what she stood for, a teacher, a protector, a mentor to young women learning how to fight not just with their hands, but with their voices. "She didn't attack you," a young woman said from the back of the group, her voice trembling but brave. "We saw. She just defended herself." Cole turned toward her, eyes blazing. "This is police business. Stay out of it." But it was too late. The narrative was no longer his alone to control. The moment he made it public, when he brought force into the open air, he had invited the world to watch, and the world was watching. Still, Jade didn't move. Still, she didn't speak. Because some truths are louder in silence. Some resistance is more powerful in stillness. And so she stood. And the longer she stood, the more those watching believed her. Not because she performed for them, but because she didn't. And that's where the power shifted. Because when people gather around a woman who has every reason to be furious but chooses discipline instead, they begin to question who the real threat is. That's when Officer Cole turned on his heel, muttering into his radio, trying to regain control. But his hands were trembling, his voice was shaking. And Jade, for the first time in what felt like years, felt seen. Not pitied, not feared. Seen. It wasn't over. She knew that. The night was still heavy, the danger still real. But in that moment, when strangers stopped running to bear witness, when voices rose not in protest but in protection, when the gaze of the crowd said, "We believe you," something shifted in her chest. She wasn't alone. And sometimes that changes everything. And now, we turn to you, the one listening. If you felt something in your chest as this unfolded, if you saw pieces of yourself in Jade, or pieces of someone you love, if you've ever wondered whether people like her, people who stand tall even when they're being torn down, are noticed, are valued, are supported, you can be the answer to that question. Leave a comment. Write, "We see you, Jade." Or tell us what this story meant to you, because your words are not just reactions. They are witnesses, too. And sometimes that's all it takes, to shift power from control to truth. So let your voice join the crowd that stood still in that park. Because when one of us is cornered, the rest of us must be brave enough to stand. And stay. The air between them cracked like dry ice, too thick to breathe and too cold to touch. Jade Matthews stood in the eye of the storm, still, poised, and undeniably present. Officer Darren Cole, red-faced and trembling, hovered near the edge of collapse. His fists were clenched so tightly they looked bloodless, his breath coming in sharp, angry bursts. She had neutralized him, not with violence, but with skill. And now he stood as a man undone in front of a crowd that had watched everything. His authority hung in tatters around him, and just when it seemed like the standoff might explode into something irreparable, another voice sliced through the tension, calm, deep, commanding. Cole. One word, but it was enough to change the air. From the shadows emerged Officer Reed Simmons, broad-shouldered and steady, his flashlight angled downward, not in accusation, but in clarity. His steps were deliberate, his posture unthreatening yet undeniably firm. In contrast to Cole's unraveling, Simmons moved with a kind of practiced restraint, like a man who understood that real power didn't have to shout. He took in the scene, the baton on the ground, the discarded taser, the small crowd of stunned onlookers, and the woman at the center of it all. Still standing, still calm, still in control of herself, in a moment designed to strip her of exactly that. Simmons didn't raise his voice. He didn't flash his badge. He didn't bark orders. Instead, he looked at Cole, like a man who had walked in on a truth he already suspected. "What's going on here?" he asked, voice even. Cole turned toward him, startled, defensive. "It's under control," he blurted. But it was a lie so thin, it barely reached the air. Simmons didn't blink. "Doesn't look that way," he said, his gaze flicking from Cole's quivering hands to the baton at his feet, to Jade's composed figure. "You've got a citizen standing still, and an officer looking like he just lost a fight. You want to walk me through that?" Cole's face twisted. His mouth opened, but the words came like excuses, not explanations. She was resisting. She's got weapons. She wouldn't comply. Simmons looked at Jade. She didn't speak. Her silence said more than any speech could. Her eyes locked onto Simmons, watching, not for approval, but for sincerity. She had seen officers like Cole before. What she needed to know now was whether Simmons was cut from the same cloth, or something closer to a human being. Simmons took a step closer to her, hands visible, body language open. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Are you all right?" Jade nodded, slow and cautious. "I'm not hurt," she said. "But I've been harassed, threatened, and accused for walking home after teaching a self-defense class." Her voice was measured, but even, like a cello string pulled taut and refusing to break. Simmons turned back to Cole. "That true?" Cole flared. "She attacked me," he snapped. "You didn't see it. She moved like she was trained for this. She's dangerous." Simmons's brow lifted. "And what did she do exactly? You want to tell me how a woman carrying a gym bag full of workout gear and wooden training tools became such a threat that you needed to draw your baton and your taser?" The joggers murmured behind them. The tension in the air shifted again. Not gone, but being redirected. Cole was losing the room. Simmons stepped forward, his voice lower now, but firmer. "Walk away, Cole. I'm handling this now." But Cole couldn't. His face flushed deeper with every word. He turned toward the crowd. "You're all being manipulated," he yelled. "She's not some victim. She knew what she was doing." Jade flinched, not from his tone, but from the desperation behind it. She recognized it now. This wasn't just about her. Cole was drowning in his own failure, gasping for breath and clawing for someone to pull under with him. "I said stand down," Simmons repeated, louder this time. His tone shifted just enough to make it clear that this was not a suggestion. It was a command. Cole stepped back, but the fury in his eyes hadn't dimmed. "She made a fool out of me," he whispered. And maybe that was the root of it. Not the accusation, not the gym bag, not even the fight, but the fact that she didn't scream, didn't run, didn't cry. She faced him like an equal, and that was a truth too heavy for his pride to carry. Simmons stepped between them now, physically inserting himself into the space, shielding Jade from further confrontation. "We're done here," he said firmly. "You're relieved for the night." Cole sputtered. "You don't have the authority." "I do," Simmons snapped. "And I'm exercising it now." He turned to Jade again. "Thank you for keeping calm, ma'am. I know this shouldn't have happened. I'll be making sure this is addressed properly." Jade looked at him, a mix of gratitude and exhaustion in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe there was still such a thing as justice in a system that had failed so many. But even now, standing beside the one man who had stepped in, she knew this wasn't over. It was never just about the moment. It was about the aftermath. The reports, the spin, the he said, she said, that could turn dignity into suspicion with one click of a keyboard. And still she nodded, because she knew one thing for certain. She hadn't backed down. She hadn't been erased. Not tonight. Behind them, Cole stormed off, his boots heavy against the pavement, his pride dragging behind him like a broken badge. Simmons radioed for backup. He filed the initial statements. He stood like a wall while she gathered her things, making sure no one else took a step toward her with anything less than respect. But Jade knew the truth. The world had seen her. The crowd had watched. A video might go viral. Headlines might spin. But she knew the truth. And now, so did they. She walked home that night not because she had won, but because she had endured. And sometimes that was more powerful than any fight. And now, you're still here. Listening. Watching. Feeling. Which means you've made it this far for a reason. Maybe it's because you believe in justice. Maybe it's because you've been in Jade's shoes. Or maybe you've just finally heard a story that didn't ask a woman to scream in order to be believed. Whatever your reason, thank you. Before this story moves on, before Jade's journey continues, before the system spins its wheels and she is asked to prove her innocence again, we ask one thing of you. Leave a comment. Tell her you believe her. Say, "We've got your back, Jade." Or say nothing and just leave a silent symbol of strength. Because she didn't just fight for herself tonight. She fought to be seen. And in doing so, she reminded us all what real power looks like. It doesn't scream. It doesn't swing wildly. It stands tall. It holds steady. And it endures. Stay with us. Because this isn't the end of Jade's story. It's just the moment she stopped being silent. The air was no longer still. It was buzzing, tense, sharp with the scent of something breaking. Officer Darren Cole, hands trembling, eyes wild, couldn't stop pacing. His jaw was clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter under the pressure of his fury. Though his badge still clung to his chest, his authority had already crumbled at his feet. Everyone could feel it. The joggers, once bystanders, now quiet witnesses, stood clustered at the edge of the path, murmuring to one another, unsure whether to stay or flee. But they stayed, because something in the air said, "Don't look away." Officer Reed Simmons had tried to de-escalate, to shield Jade Matthews from the unraveling chaos that now wore a uniform and a grudge. But it wasn't enough. Not for Cole. Not for a man whose sense of power had been publicly fractured. Not for someone who had mistaken a woman's composure for insolence, her strength for threat, her dignity for defiance. Jade stood still once again, her posture calm but coiled, her body alert but never aggressive. She didn't want to fight. She never did, but now she could see it in his eyes. He wanted one. Not for justice, not for law, but for pride. Because the truth, bare and undignified, was that he'd lost control, and now he needed someone to pay for that. Simmons saw it too. "Cole," he said, stepping forward, voice low and firm. "You've been ordered to stand down. Don't make this worse." But Cole wasn't listening. His ears were ringing with humiliation. His heart pounded with something darker than adrenaline. He turned back to his cruiser, his boots pounding against the pavement with the finality of a man past the edge. He's going for something, Jade thought. Her instincts screamed it before her mind could catch up. Simmons moved too, but not fast enough. Cole flung the cruiser's door open and yanked something from inside. His baton. Again. This time gripping it like a lifeline, knuckles white, face flushed with rage. "She's not getting away with this," he roared, more to himself than anyone else. The crowd gasped. Simmons' hand hovered near his belt, his voice now sharp, cutting through the night like a blade. "Put it down, Cole. This is your final warning." But Cole didn't stop. He didn't blink. He charged. Time seemed to bend in on itself as he ran full force toward Jade, baton raised high. And yet Jade didn't panic. Her body shifted, honed by years of discipline. She moved like a memory, fluid, automatic, as though this moment had already been rehearsed 1,000 times in the silence of her training. The baton came down, fast, fierce, and missed. Jade pivoted, her frame sliding under the blow with surgical precision. She turned, catching his wrist mid-swing and twisting, not to break, but to disarm. The baton clattered to the pavement once again, and the sound was deafening. Cole's momentum carried him forward, and Jade stepped behind him, sweeping his legs out from under him in a clean, merciful takedown. He hit the ground hard, this time not just stunned, but defeated. The moment he landed, something shifted in the park. A crack in the tension. A held breath finally released. The joggers exhaled. Some applauded quietly. Some simply stood there, blinking in disbelief. Simmons moved instantly, cuffing Cole with a force born not of rage, but necessity. "That's enough," Simmons barked, as he pressed Cole's face to the pavement. "You're done, big officer. You crossed every line tonight, and now you're going to answer for it." Cole struggled, not with strength, but desperation. His voice trembled with rage. "She attacked me. She's dangerous. She set me up. This is all." But his words dissolved into a guttural sound. The last cry of a man who built his identity on control and watched it crumble beneath the calm gaze of a woman who refused to shrink. Jade didn't move. She just watched. Her body still humming with the adrenaline of survival, but her face unreadable. Not triumphant, not angry, just present, just alive. Simmons stood, breathing heavily, eyes dark with the gravity of what had just transpired. Backup arrived seconds later, sirens low, lights pulsing in the trees. Officers emerged, some startled, some solemn, as Simmons laid it out. Unlawful use of force, failure to comply with a superior's order, escalation against a civilian. I'll file the full report myself. And then Simmons turned to Jade, this time not as a cop, not as an official, but as a man who had just watched someone do the impossible, face injustice, endure its wrath, and still stand taller than the system that tried to bend her. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice had softened again, no longer commanding but careful. Jade nodded slowly, her lips parted, her breath catching in her throat, not because she was out of breath, but because she knew what had almost happened, how close it had come to something irreversible, and how quickly the headlines would have written a different story if even a single detail had changed. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice carried the exhaustion of every time she'd had to say that before. "Thank you." Simmons nodded. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," he said. "But I promise you, it's not going to disappear." As Cole was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, his eyes never once meeting hers, Jade allowed herself a moment to close her eyes. Just for a second. Not to escape, but to hold the stillness she had fought for. The danger had passed, for now, but the echoes of it would stay. In her bones. In the crowd. In the memories of those who had watched and seen everything. And she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't even close. Because Officer Cole was just one man, one symptom of something deeper, more rooted, more dangerous. She hadn't defeated the system. She had survived it. For one night. But survival was not the same as victory. And as she looked around the park, at the joggers dispersing, at Simmons still issuing orders, at the officers collecting statements, she felt a flicker of something more dangerous than fear. Resolve. She would not be a footnote. She would not be rewritten. And this moment, this truth, would not be erased. If you're still here, thank you. You didn't click away. You didn't flinch when it got hard to hear. You stayed with Jade through every heartbeat of this confrontation. And if her strength moved something in you, if you held your breath when she stood her ground, or clenched your jaw when she was attacked, or felt your own pulse race as she refused to fall, then say something. Leave a comment. Write, "We stand with Jade," or "We believe you," or just let her know. You are not alone. Because this is not just a story about one night in a park. It's a story about all the nights, all the quiet injustices no one saw, all the survivors who stood still, hoping someone would believe what really happened. Be that someone. Jade fought to be heard. Don't let her voice disappear into silence. And stay with us, because what comes next will change everything. The night had passed, but it hadn't really ended. It clung to Jade Matthews like a second skin, refusing to shed even as the sun began to rise over the city skyline. Morning light streamed through the curtains of her modest apartment, turning everything gold and soft. But there was no warmth in her chest. Jade sat at her kitchen table, a chipped mug of tea growing cold between her hands, her gaze fixed on nothing and everything. Her body still ached in places she couldn't name, not bruises or injuries, but something deeper, something lodged between her ribs, behind her throat, beneath her heart. Her mind played the confrontation back on an endless reel, the baton raised, the hiss of the taser, the hum of the crowd, Officer Cole's voice, shrill with rage, saying, "She's not getting away with this." She could still hear it. Not just in memory, but like it was stitched into the fabric of her muscles. The worst part wasn't the fight. It wasn't the fear. It wasn't even the threat of violence. It was the aftermath, the knowing. The knowledge that if she hadn't been composed, if she hadn't been trained, if she had raised her voice just once, it could have ended very differently. Her students might have found her name trending for the wrong reasons. Her mother might have gotten a call that no parent should ever get. And she would have joined the ranks of the silenced, her truth buried under protocol and paperwork. She wrapped her hands around the mug, needing the anchor. Outside, the world moved on, Cars passed. Birds chirped. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed. And inside her, stillness. Heavy, exhausted stillness. A stillness earned, not chosen. The kind that comes after surviving a night where you weren't sure if survival was on the menu. Her phone buzzed across the table. She flinched, just slightly. Her eyes drifted to the screen. Unknown number. For a split second, her stomach tightened, but she answered. A calm voice greeted her. "Ms. Matthews, this is Officer Reed Simmons. I wanted to thank you again for your composure last night. I've submitted my report. Internal Affairs will be conducting a full review." His voice was steady, professional, but human. She could tell he meant it. "I also wanted you to know," he continued, "Cole is currently suspended, and we've recommended immediate evaluation." Jade closed her eyes for a moment. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means something." And it did. Not everything, not justice, but something. A crack of sunlight in a long hallway of shadows. But just as she hung up, a wave of something unexpected hit her. Grief. Not for herself, but for the countless others who hadn't been believed, who hadn't had a crowd of joggers appear at the right moment, who didn't have a Simmons to step between them and chaos. She remembered the women in her self-defense class. Young, old, tired, fierce. One had confided in her last year after class, her voice shaking. "I wish I'd known this sooner. Maybe I could have stopped what happened." Jade had hugged her, holding her like a sister. But now that moment came rushing back, painful and raw. How many people never get to say their side? That was the part that broke her the most. She pushed away from the table, her legs stiff, and walked toward the window. The city was waking up, unaware, or maybe unwilling, to see what had happened in that park. She thought about the video. She knew at least 2 joggers had recorded it. She wasn't sure if it had been posted yet. She didn't care about going viral. She cared about the truth. If someone was going to tell the story, she wanted it told right. Not as a woman who defended herself, but as a woman who survived the burden of being perceived as a threat for simply refusing to cower. Later that afternoon, she went back to the community center. Not because she had to, but because she needed to. The space smelled like sweat and lavender oil. Familiar. Grounding. The students came in slowly at first, but when they saw her, really saw her, something shifted. One of them, a young woman named Alina, walked up and hugged her without a word. Jade felt the tears building behind her eyes, but didn't let them fall. Not here. Not yet. Class was different that day. Slower. More deliberate. She taught them how to break free from wrist holds, how to block a downward strike. But her words reached further. "Your body isn't your only weapon," she said to the group. "Your voice, your breath, your ability to stay centered when someone tries to make you small, that's your shield. They'll try to make you feel like protecting yourself is a crime, like surviving with your head up is rebellion. Let them try, and stand anyway." A few students looked like they might cry. A few nodded with quiet fire in their eyes. She could see it. The shift. And that gave her strength. After class, as the room emptied, one older student lingered. Mrs. Green, 70 years old, and still learning to throw a punch. She took Jade's hand, her voice gravelly but kind. "You keep doing what you're doing, baby," she said. Because you're doing it right. Jade smiled. Small, but real. And for the first time since the incident, she felt her breath move freely through her chest. But as night fell, the shadows returned. She couldn't stop her mind from playing out what might have happened if Cole had swung a second sooner, if she had hesitated, if the joggers hadn't come, if Simmons had been someone else. It wasn't paranoia. It was math. Statistics. Headlines. She had dodged a bullet, but not everyone had that same grace under pressure, that same training, that same luck. She sat on the mat alone that night, the gym dark except for the glow of one overhead light. She held one of her wooden practice knives in her hand, running her thumb along its edge. It was smooth, harmless, and yet it had been the excuse used to call her dangerous. Dangerous. For carrying tools she used to teach women how to survive. She set it down and looked around the empty room. And for a moment, the silence wrapped around her like armor. And then her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a new voice. Ms. Matthews, this is Detective Avery from Internal Affairs. We've received Simmons's report, and we've also been made aware of previous complaints filed against Officer Cole. We'd like to speak with you further. Your account will be critical. This is the most complete documentation we've ever had regarding his conduct. Jade nodded to no one in the room. I'll help in any way I can. Because she could help. And maybe this time, helping wouldn't just be about throwing a punch or deflecting a blow. Maybe this time, helping meant pulling the curtain back on a broken machine and shining a light on every gear and cog soaked in silence and complicity, and she was ready for that too, E4. And now, if you're still listening, if you made it through her breathless walk home, if you stood with her in that park, heart pounding, fists clenched, if you felt the weight of her reflection, her restraint, her weariness, and her quiet, unshakable strength, leave her a message. Type, "We see you, Jade," or "Your strength matters." Because she didn't just survive last night for herself. She survived it for you, for the student too afraid to speak, for the woman who never got her justice, for the daughter who still walks home with her keys between her fingers and her head on a swivel. She stood her ground. Now it's your turn to stand with her. Leave a comment. Tell her she's not alone. Because one voice can spark change. But a chorus can't be ignored. The days that followed felt like walking through water. Every step slow, heavy, deliberate. Jade Matthews moved with the weight of the confrontation still on her shoulders, but she also carried something else now. A spark. The story of what happened that night in Pinewood Park wasn't confined to the joggers' quiet retellings or Officer Simmons' report. It had begun to ripple outward. The videos taken during the incident had surfaced online. They hadn't gone viral in a sensational way, but they spread like wildfire through the city's community boards and activist circles. People recognized her. Not everyone knew her name, but they knew her face. The woman who stayed calm while an officer raged, who deflected violence without inflicting it, who stood like a fortress under pressure. "Did you see that woman in the park?" they whispered. She didn't even flinch. And that was what stunned people the most. Not the takedown, not the disarm, but the stillness. The composure, the refusal to be provoked into chaos. Jade didn't go looking for attention. She didn't need to. She kept showing up at the community center, just like always. Teaching, encouraging, offering small corrections to students learning their first breakaway moves. "Chin up," she'd say softly. "Shoulders strong." But her presence now carried a different kind of resonance. Students looked at her differently. Not with fear, but reverence, as if she was no longer just their instructor, but a living example of what self-possession could look like in the face of danger. A quiet girl in the back of the room, Kayla, barely 16, stayed after class one day. "Miss Jade?" she whispered. "When he came at you, weren't you scared?" Jade paused, her hands folded, her face still. "Yes," she answered honestly. "I was scared, but I didn't let it choose for me." Kayla nodded slowly, her eyes welling. "I want to be like that too." And Jade, for the first time since the incident, smiled. Not the small, polite one she'd been wearing all week, but a real one. A smile rooted in knowing she had planted something that would outlast even the fear. That same evening, as the sun dipped beneath the skyline and threw orange light across the walls of her apartment, Jade got another message. This time, it was from Detective Avery, the internal affairs officer who had first contacted her. "Jade," it read, "Cole's review is underway. There's more history, more complaints, but your case is different. Your actions, Simmons' report, and the footage, it's created undeniable momentum. If you're open to it, I'd like to speak to you further about how we use your experience to push for reform. Real change, the kind we rarely get to initiate." Jade sat with the message for a long while, fingers hovering above the screen. She thought about all the times she'd filed formal complaints that led nowhere. All the stories she'd heard from women like her. Quiet, capable, but constantly forced to navigate systems built to crush their dignity. And now, somehow, she had become the tipping point. She responded with 3 words. "I'm ready now." Later that week, Officer Simmons showed up at the community center unannounced. His presence still carried authority, but also something softer, an awareness that had only grown since that night. He waited until class ended, then approached her with no badge in sight, only a humble nod. "I wanted to let you know," he said, "that Cole has officially been removed from active duty, pending full termination." Jade looked at him, her expression unreadable, her breath slow. "It won't bring back the years he hurt people before me," she said, "but I appreciate it." Simmons nodded. "You're right, but you've created something hard to ignore. The department has opened a new review board for use of force incidents. Your story pushed that forward. You should know that." Jade didn't say much in response. She didn't need to. Her eyes said what words couldn't. You helped. But we're not done. And they weren't. A few days later, one of the joggers from that night returned to the center. A woman named Alexis. She wasn't a student, just a runner who'd seen too much that night to stay silent. She brought homemade muffins and a shy smile. "I've been thinking about you," she said, setting them down gently. "That night, I didn't know what to do. I just recorded. I didn't step in. I was scared." Jade reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "You were there," she said softly. "You stayed. That matters more than you think." Alexis nodded, her eyes misting. "You're the bravest person I've ever seen." Jade shook her head. "No, I was just tired of running. And it was true. And it was. She wasn't brave in the way people thought. Fearless, invincible. She had been afraid. She had felt the chill of knowing one wrong breath could become her undoing. But she'd stood anyway, because fear had stopped her enough times in life. That night, she'd decided it wouldn't win. And now, neither would silence. So she started writing. Not for the world, not for fame, but for herself. Page after page poured out. About what it means to be watched, what it means to be controlled, what it means to be a black woman moving through a world that too often sees strength as defiance and stillness as provocation. She wrote about Officer Cole not as a villain, but as a reflection of the system that shaped him. She wrote about Simmons not as a savior, but as a man who chose, in one moment, to listen instead of dominate. And she wrote about her students, her sisters, really. Each one learning to fight for space, to reclaim breath, to protect their peace. She submitted her writing anonymously at first. But it spread. People reposted her words. They quoted her. "My body is not a threat just because it refuses to shrink. Calm is not compliance, it's control." Soon, local organizers reached out, asking her to speak at panels. A college class read her statement as part of their curriculum on criminal justice reform. And still, she kept showing up at the community center, barefoot on the mats, guiding hands, teaching breath work, anchoring people in the belief that they deserved to be safe in their own skin. Jade never set out to be a symbol. But the truth is, sometimes the strongest voices aren't the loudest. They're the ones that stay calm while the world tries to storm around them, the ones that say no, not with violence, but with presence. And Jade Matthews had become one of those voices. And now, listener, if you're still here, it means something. You stayed through the chaos. You walked through the fear. You sat with the tension, and now you're breathing through the release. If Jade's story moved something in you, if her silence, her strength, her survival reminded you of what it means to hold your ground when everything tries to push you down, let her know. Drop a comment below. Write, "We're still here with you, Jade," or "Your calm is power." Or just to show you heard her voice and you chose to listen. Because there are too many moments in this world where people like Jade are spoken over, dismissed, rewritten. But this time, you saw her. You stayed. You felt it. And that changes everything. So stay with us. Because her story doesn't end here. It rises. Time moved on, but not like it used to. In the weeks following the incident in Pinewood Park, Jade Matthews found herself walking through a world that now seemed to echo her name in ways she never expected. She wasn't trying to become anyone's symbol. But what happened that night? The confrontation, the control, the restraint, the fire in her spine when Officer Cole tried to turn her dignity into defiance, had lit something far beyond her own path. Her life didn't change with headlines or hashtags, because none of that had been her goal. But it did change through whispers, through conversations behind closed doors, through young women approaching her after class, asking questions with trembling voices, not just about martial arts, but about how to stay whole in a world designed to shatter you. Through grandmothers who'd never thrown a punch placing their hands gently over hers and saying, "You gave me hope." And through little girls with wide eyes and wild curls asking, "Miss Jade, are you a superhero?" She always smiled at that. "No," she'd say, crouching to their level. "But I believe you can be." The community center became something more than just a gym. It became a haven. People who had never set foot on a mat before now lingered by the doors, watching, listening. Some would stand silently in the back during her classes, not saying a word, just being there. Survivors, single mothers, teenagers who had learned to make themselves small. Men who never knew how to talk about fear. The air felt different now, charged with purpose. Every lesson carried more than technique. Every breath between strikes held space for reflection. Jade had always taught self-defense, but now she was teaching something more powerful. How to reclaim the right to feel safe in your own skin. Still, even with the growing support, Even with the public praise and new opportunities, there were days when Jade felt the weight settle back on her shoulders. Days when she couldn't sleep. When she sat up in bed, the night air too quiet, the memory of the baton too loud. Days when she second-guessed every movement from that night, wondering what might have happened if her timing had been off by even a second. Days when she remembered the look in Officer Cole's eyes, not just the rage, but the disbelief. As if he couldn't fathom a world in which a woman like her refused to cower. Those were the hardest days, because they reminded her that even though she had walked away unharmed, not everyone did. She carried their names like a quiet roll call in her heart. People who didn't have cameras, who didn't have Officer Simmons, who didn't have enough breath left to tell their side of the story. But she also carried something else now: community. Everywhere she went, people stopped her, not to idolize her, but to connect. At the farmer's market, a young woman named Dina handed her a bouquet of sunflowers. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking, "for not shrinking." A bus driver called out as she boarded, "Keep fighting, Ms. Jade." A local high school invited her to speak at a girls' leadership summit, and she did. Not to relive the trauma, but to share the truth of what it meant to be calm under pressure, to resist with discipline, to take up space even when it made others uncomfortable. She spoke about strength, not as aggression, but as clarity, not as force, but as presence. The auditorium had gone silent, not from fear, but from respect. Soon, the city's Office of Community Safety reached out. They wanted her input on creating de-escalation workshops, real ones, grounded in experience. They had Simmons on board. "We don't want to just put your face on a flyer," the director had said. "We want your voice shaping this." Jade had paused, feeling the enormity of that invitation. "I'll do it," she said, "but only if we center survivors. Not just people like me, but people who didn't get the ending I did." And that was the core of who she remained. Never seeking the spotlight, but never backing away from it when it meant changing something for the better. One evening, as she closed the community center alone, sweeping the floor, wiping down the mirrors, her phone buzzed with a new message. A video. She opened it cautiously. It was a recording of one of her youngest students, maybe 11, showing her classmates how to break free from a wrist grab. The video ended with the child saying, "Miss Jade taught me this. She says even quiet people can be strong." Jade covered her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from something more sacred. Legacy. She had never wanted fame. She had only ever wanted to protect what was sacred. Now, that protection had become permission, for others to be brave too. And still, there was more to do. The story wasn't over. Because justice, as she had learned, wasn't a moment. It was a practice, like breath work, like sparring, like waking up and choosing over and over to meet the world with both strength and softness. So she kept showing up. In gyms, in classrooms, on city boards. She answered emails from people in other cities wanting to start programs like hers. She joined calls about policy reform, always asking the same question. Are you listening to the people most affected? She never stopped training either. The body remembers, after all. The body holds the truth. And Jade knew that one day she might be tested again. But this time, she wouldn't be standing alone. Her students would be standing behind her, her community beside her. And quietly, but meaningfully, you would be standing with her too. And so, listener, if you've made it this far, you know this story wasn't just about a confrontation in a park. It was about what happens when a person refuses to be defined by someone else's fear. It was about the kind of courage that doesn't show up as fists flying, but as stillness under fire. It was about what changes when one person says, "You will not silence me today." And it was about the world that blooms after that moment, if we're brave enough to water it. If you were moved by Jade's strength, let her know. Leave a comment. Type, "We see you, Jade," or "Your calm is power," or just share your heart. Tell us how her story made you feel. Because when one person holds the line, the rest of us are called to step up too. To speak up. To stand beside. To say, "You're not alone. This is not the end of her story. It's the beginning of something deeper." And your voice, your comment, can be the next chapter. The city was quiet again, its heartbeat slower, its streets wrapped in the kind of stillness that only came after a storm had passed. Jade Matthews walked home alone, but no longer in the same silence she once feared. The same path where it all happened, Pinewood Park, now shimmered with a kind of haunted grace. Streetlights stretched long shadows across the pavement, just like before, but this time they didn't feel ominous. They felt earned. They felt. Each step she took whispered a memory, where he shouted, where she stood her ground, where strangers stood still and bore witness, where control was demanded and calm became rebellion. But now there was no baton, no yelling, no fists clenched with shame disguised as power. Only Jade. Breathing, moving, choosing peace, not because she was weak, but because she finally understood what it meant to live beyond survival. She paused beneath a lamppost, the same one where Officer Cole had tried to strip her of her humanity, and looked up at the pale stars overhead. They didn't shine brighter. The world hadn't shifted on its axis. But inside her, something had changed forever. She had endured. But more than that, she had become. She was no longer just a martial arts instructor, no longer just a sculptor who found stillness in clay, no longer just the quiet girl who learned long ago that the world would try to shrink her until she forgot her own shape. Jade had become the embodiment of a truth too many forget. That real strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to dominate. Real strength is control. It is choice. It is standing still when everything pushes you to break. And because she lived that truth, other people had begun to believe they could too. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, her world didn't explode with headlines or praise. It unfolded slowly, like healing. Her community wrapped around her like a warm coat. Survivors came to her, sharing their own stories with trembling voices and grateful eyes. Officers came to her trainings, ready to learn, not to control. Children looked at her like she was more than a teacher. They saw a lighthouse, and Jade accepted it all not with pride, but with purpose. The story that had started with fear ended with responsibility. She knew now that every moment of composure, every breath she took in the face of power trying to erase her, was not just for her own survival. It was a gift she was giving forward. And so, standing in that same park where it had nearly all been taken from her, Jade offered this lesson, not through a press conference or a podcast, but through her life. That night she recorded a short message, not for social media fame, not for sympathy, but because someone out there needed to hear it. Her voice, calm and low, broke the silence of her phone camera. If you're listening to this, I need you to know something. Your strength doesn't have to look like fighting back. Sometimes it looks like standing still. Sometimes it looks like walking away. Sometimes it looks like breathing when they want you to panic. What happened to me isn't just my story. It's what happens every day when fear wears a badge and pride pretends to be justice. I didn't win because I was stronger than him. I won because I refused to lose myself. And you can do that too. In whatever way life challenges you, whether someone doubts your worth, questions your truth, or pushes you to the edge, you have a right to your calm. You have a right to your peace. You have a right to exist without apology. And with that, she ended the recording. The message spread, not virally, but purposefully, passed from hand to hand, from inbox to inbox, shared in classrooms, in women's circles, in family group chats. A truth passed forward not as a scream, but as a steady hand saying, "You are not alone." Jade continued to live her life. She sculpted again. This time, not just abstract forms, but women standing tall, eyes closed in peace. She kept teaching. Her classes full now, with wait lists of students eager to learn not just how to protect their bodies, but how to reclaim their power. She consulted with city officials on reform policies. She mentored young women quietly. And every night, when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a victim. She didn't even see a fighter. She saw someone who had decided who she was going to be, and no one had taken that away from her. And maybe that's what this story is really about. Not just injustice, not just survival, not just a moment of self-defense, but the choice to keep choosing who you are, even when the world tells you to shrink. Jade Matthews made that choice. Not just once, but over and over. And now you, yes, you listening, can choose too. Maybe your moment of pressure won't happen in a park. Maybe it'll be in a boardroom, in a classroom, in a kitchen, in a mirror. Maybe someone will question your value, your voice, your truth. And when that moment comes, remember this. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to fight to prove your worth. You don't have to bend to be safe. You just have to breathe. Stand your ground and hold on to your peace like it's the most sacred thing in the world. Because it is. So now, listener, if Jade's story meant something to you, if you felt your chest tighten with anger, or your eyes burn with tears, or your heart swell with hope, don't let it end here. Leave a comment below, write, "Your calm is powerful, Jade," or "Thank you for standing tall," or just, "We see you." Because when you speak up, when you leave your words, you tell Jade and every person like her, you are not alone. Click like to show your support. Comment to carry her courage forward. And subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that matter. Stories that don't just entertain, but breathe life into the truth. Because there are more voices like Jade's out there, and they deserve to be heard. You just heard hers. Now, make sure someone else does too.